Welcome to my presentation on Elliot Eisner's article, What Does It Mean to Say a School is Doing Well? First, let me say that I found this article particularly enlightening, especially as it relates to some of our essential questions. Let's begin with a brief overview of Elliot Eisner's background. Eisner was a professor of art and education at Stanford University. His research interests included arts education, curriculum reform, and qualitative research methods. He grew up in Chicago and from an early age wanted to become a professional artist. Yet while studying at the University of Chicago to become a commercial artist, he began working with students in an urban Chicago school, and his focus shifted from commercial art to art education. With his art background, Eisner worried that the current model of education in America was unbalanced and placed art on a lesser level of importance. He was particularly worried that the cognitive skills behind art are not fostered, and with Howard Gardner developed the cognitive theories of learning that were grounded in art. Another aspect of Eisner's view of education was his idea that education itself is an artistic activity. Eisner argued that viewing education as a distinct art allows us, the educators, to move beyond the technical know-how of teaching and learning and open our minds to more creative ways of knowing and being. In his article, What Does It Mean to Say a School is Doing Well?, Eisner poses numerous questions. My presentation will examine and comment on a few of them. Let's first examine Eisner's question, do students participate in assessment of their own work? And if so, how? I think he asked this question to make a point about student motivation. In this section of the article, Eisner seems to be advising teachers to allow students to help design their assessments. He focuses on the need for students to be genuinely engaged in what they do in school. He rationalizes that when teachers create opportunities for students to be a part of assessing their work, students are more likely to find satisfaction in their learning. He calls it the locus of satisfactions and points out that there are generally three reasons for doing something. You like what it feels like, and like who you are when you're doing it. These are essentially intrinsic satisfying activities. The second, you're doing it not because you like doing it, but because you like the results of having done it. This would be something similar to like working out to stay fit. And the third, you do it not because you like the process or even the outcome, but because you like the rewards. I would equate this with someone working for their paycheck. In the next question, are students encouraged to wonder and to raise questions about what they have studied? Here it seems Eisner is asking teachers to encourage questioning as a way to deepen student learning. I know that many educators will ask any questions after they've completed a lecture, and they assume that if there are no questions asked by the students must be confident in their understanding of what was taught. But Eisner is encouraging us to introduce our students to multiple perspectives and concern ourselves as teachers less with whether the students can answer all of our questions and more with whether they can ask their own questions. Eisner says that when students have no reason to raise questions, the process that enables them to learn how to discover intellectual problems goes undeveloped. In the third question, Eisner poses, are parents helped to understand what their child has accomplished in class? I believe Eisner poses this question to help us understand that education is sometimes too focused on the grade and not on the learning process itself. Eisner says we need to help parents understand what their child has learned by showing them or by looking at prior work and comparing it with present work. That is, by looking at what the students have accomplished over time. In fact, Eisner is talking about getting people to focus not so much on what the grade is, but on the process that led to the outcome. This seems like a pretty simple idea, and yet, if you read Eisner's article, he really points out that the current form of education does not promote this thought at all. The final question I want to look at is, what is his point? He says, what is my point? Eisner wants educators to widen what parents and others believe to be important in judging the quality of our schools. In other words, I think he feels like we're judging our schools on more superficial things than what ought to be important. Right now, our schools are judged by standardized test scores and standards-based learning. Eisner says that a more informed conception of what constitutes quality in education leads to greater equity for students and ultimately for our entire culture. In other words, Eisner wants schools to be a place where each youngster, he calls them youngsters, or we'll say learner, can find a place in the educational sun. In other words, shine, show their worth. But he says that our current system focuses on honoring only those in which assessment can measure, and it marginalizes learners whose aptitudes and interests lie elsewhere. In part, Eisner blames some of our focus on standardization in our schools as inherent to an age-graded system. Finally, Eisner ends his article with a call to reform the current system with a fresh and humane vision of what schools might become. Because, as Eisner believes, what our schools become has everything to do with what our children and our culture will become. I really enjoyed this article by Eisner. It was easy to understand, and I think I agreed with a lot of the concepts that he talked about. And what I found interesting here was the idea that by neglecting certain ways of learning, we kind of send a message to our students that there's only one way to learn, or only one approach to solve a problem, or only one way to demonstrate learning. I think about this as a parent when my child would come home and we would be doing a math lesson, and I was trying to help my child understand the math lesson based on the way I had learned math, and my child would say, no, that's not right, that's not the way the teacher said we were supposed to do it. It seems to me like the process should always be about, in math in particular, about getting to the correct answer, and the way you get there might not always be the same. This caused me also to reflect on my own practice of teaching and to consider how much I relied on single ways of teaching, single ways of thinking, learning, and sharing knowledge. I think that we need to think about multiple perspectives, as Eisner said. I want to thank you for joining me, and I want to leave you with a quote from Eisner's article on page 318 that I think sums up his ideas on the real measure of what does it mean to say a school is doing well. He states, it's what students do with what they learn when they can do what they want to do that is the real measure of educational achievement.